Okay, so in our last video lesson, we talked about the ratification debate and the Federalists versus the Anti-Federalists. So we're going to wrap up ratification in this video. So there is going to be a question of tyranny. Okay, so both the Federalists and Anti-Federalists are wanting to avoid tyranny. They don't want to find themselves in any kind of situation similar to the one that they had under Great Britain. So they're going to agree that tyranny can take two forms. The big one is going to be tyranny of the minority. This is the one that's going to be talked about a lot. And this is where a small number of citizens tramples the rights of the larger population. So Anti-Federalists are fearing that the government will become disconnected from the majority. So the fear here is that tyranny is going to take place when a small group of people are elected to those government positions. They have power under this new constitution, under the federal government, that they are going to trample on the rights of citizens when they get the power, okay? They have that ability under this new constitution. So there's this fear that a small group of people are going to trample on the rights of the larger population. The other form of tyranny is tyranny of the majority. And this is where a large number of citizens would use the power of the majority to trample on a smaller group. You can think of this as oppression of the minority. So the national government versus the states. So a big part of this ratification debate is going to be over the relative power of the states and the national government. So again, Federalists are going to argue that the proposed form of government is needed to preserve rights. So they are arguing in favor of this strong central government and against the Articles of Confederation. Remember, they're pointing out all of those weaknesses within the Articles. Whereas the Federalists are going to argue that it would allow the national government to infringe on the states. Okay, so the Anti-Federalists are arguing this new strong central government is going to become too powerful and it is going to trample on the rights of states. So let's look at some more of these foundational documents. And this is another document that is going to be required for the AP exam. So make sure that you are familiar with Brutus 1. So last time we talked about the Federalist Papers and how Federalists are writing those, trying to influence the ratification. They're wanting people to side with this new constitution. Well, Brutus is going to have their letter, the Anti-Federalists are going to have their letters as well, and it's going to be written under this pseudonym Brutus. They're going to have about 16 papers that are published. Anti-Federalists are fearing a radical increase in national power in the Constitution and how the government might evolve over time. So Anti-Federalists are afraid that the government growing too large could hinder the liberty of citizens, all right? So it's going to be a danger to personal liberty. In Brutus number 1, Robert Yates, who's from New York, is going to argue that the country is too large to be governed as a republic, so where people actually have a say in the government, and that the Constitution is going to give too much power to the national government. So let's look at some of the arguments in Brutus number 1. The big one is going to be representation of the people's interests could not be maintained as the country grew. So what this means, what Yates is arguing here, is that as the country grows, people in positions of power, so those elected officials in government, are going to become more and more distant from the people that they represent. Okay, so people's interests are not actually going to be represented in this strong national government. Okay, so representation of the people's interests cannot be maintained as the country grew. Yates is also going to argue that once comfortable in their jobs, representatives are not going to want to give up power. So once these government officials have control, they're not going to want to give up that control. He is going to write about the fear of power being taken away from the states. So remember, Anti-Federalists are wanting states to retain some of their power. And he's also going to argue that national control of the military could threaten liberty. Okay, so again, he's saying that this strong national government could threaten the liberty of citizens. So let's look at another document, and this is going to come from the Federalist side. So in Federalist number 51, James Madison, is going to argue that the key to preventing tyranny, okay, so this is the response to this question of tyranny, was to provide a separation of powers within the national government to prevent any one branch from trampling on the rights of citizens. So he's saying, hey, Tyranny is a possibility, but this Constitution is designed to prevent that because we have a separation of powers. So he recognizes that the success of the new government could not rest on the character or morals of individuals who might come into positions of power. He's going to say if men were angels, no government would be necessary. So he knows that people put in positions of power might want to use that power to their advantage, and that's why they have created this separation of powers within the government. So he argues that separation of powers, along with checks and balances, which we talked about in the previous lesson, would provide a way for ambition to counteract ambition. So he's saying that by granting each branch of government weapons to effectively prevent self-interested abuses of power by the other branches. So what he's saying is that separations of power is going to keep any one branch from abusing their position in government. Okay, so separation of power is going to keep any one branch of government from trampling on the rights of citizens. He's going to also argue in Federalist 51 that powers divided between the national and state governments is also going to further prevent tyranny. Okay, and wrapping up these ratification debates. So again, we talked about in the previous lesson how anti-federalists are going to say the Constitution needs a Bill of Rights. There needs to be a list of rights that the government cannot trample on or take away. So that they're going to be arguing in favor of this Bill of Rights. Okay, so those rights and liberties that the government can't take away. Whereas Madison and the Federalists aren't going to see it as necessary. So again, some are going to worry that the Bill of Rights could limit the liberties to those that are expressly listed. So the only protections people are going to have from the government are those listed in the Bill of Rights. Okay, so that was the fear of the Federalists. Now, the Constitution is actually going to be ratified in June of 1788 without the Bill of Rights. But anti-federalists are still going to argue that a Bill of Rights would serve to remind citizens of their national rights and remind them to assert those rights when the government tried to take them away. So again, the Constitution is going to be ratified, but only after those pro-constitutional forces, so the Federalists, are going to agree to propose a Bill of Rights, okay? So all of the states are going to ratify the Constitution, but only after they agree to add in the Bill of Rights later. So in 1791, 10 amendments that are proposed by Madison are going to become part of the Constitution as the Bill of Rights, and now we have the Constitution that you all see today.